Thank you everyone again for being here. My name is Cesar Cornejo. I'm Associate Professor of Fine Art at the School of Fine Art, History of Art and Cultural Studies at the University of Leeds. It is my honor to introduce today as the inaugural guest of the Platform for Interdisciplinary Research in Art, Technology and Education, PIRAT, and with support of the School of Fine Art, History of Art and Cultural Studies at the University of Leeds, renowned curator Julie Lazar. Julie Lazar is based in the Bay Area, where she works as independent curator and arts consultant, specializing in the production and presentation of new artworks in multiple genres. Among the artists Lazar has worked closely with are John Adams, Belkis Ayon, J.D. Beltran, Anne Bray, John Cage, Anne Carlson, Mel Chin, Ellen Sebastian Chang, Remy Charlep, Lucinda Childs, Paul de Jong, Juan Davis, Anthony DiCenza, Sandro Duquette, Karen Finley, Bill Fontana, Geoff Gallegos, Frank Gehry, Guillermo Gomez Peña, Brent Green, Renee Green, Gary Hill, Joan Gendrero, Hirokazu Kosaka, Rick Lowe, Elizabeth LeCompte, Ming-Wei Lee, George LeGrady, Sherry Levine, Anthony McCall, Julia Meltzer and David Thorne, Patty O'Neill, Tim Robbins and the Actors Gang, Connie Samaras, Betty Saar, Peter Sellers, Mary Sester, Harry Scherer, Carl Stone, Elizabeth Streb, Adam Silverman, Doho Su, Nader Terani, Mirle Leatherman, Ukeles, Ron Volter, Bill Viola, and Gary Winogrand. Julie Lazar relocated to California to serve as a founding curator and director of experimental programs for over 19 years at the Museum of Contemporary Art, Los Angeles. Earlier in New York, she led development programs at PS1 Contemporary Art Center, Hudson River Museum, Rockefeller University, and the Museum of Modern Art. She began her work with nonprofits at Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts. Currently, Lazar is organizing the retrospective on Asymmetry, the art and performance of Hirokazu Kosaka for the Japanese American Cultural and Community Center in Los Angeles. Today, she will be talking about John Cage's seminal exhibition, Rolywholyover, a Circus, which she organized and presented at the Los Angeles Museum of Contemporary Art in 1992 and 1993. This event is being recorded, and I would like to please ask you to turn off your microphones during the presentation, and to also kindly keep any questions that you may have for after the presentation has ended. Please join me to give a warm welcome to Julie Lazar.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm sorry, that makes me feel so old hearing all of those things. But, and I thank you for your invitation. It's been wonderful for me to revisit the development of Rolywholyover Circus, which was a great honor for me to undertake, and has still teaching me to this day new things. I do have a presentation. I'm not technologically too adept, so I'm going to see if I can share my screen with you and get underway. So let me do that. Here we go. So share the screen, share the sound, optimize video, share, and starting here. Play the video. Okay. So how is that? Is it working?
It's perfect. Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay. So this is just to give you a quick look. It's a beautiful shot at the Menil Foundation in Houston. And I'll get back to all the various things that are going on here as we proceed. But I just thought it's clearer and the colors are more beautiful and true than anything that I had taken at MoCA. So, so there's the various locations where it went. It started in LA and then went to Houston and then to the downtown Guggenheim Museum, which no longer exists, and the Mito Art Tower in Japan, and returned and concluded in Philadelphia. I know it could have carried on longer and certainly could have traveled to Europe. Hold on, I'm going to stop this. But we couldn't keep the loans that long. And in fact, it was difficult enough to convince people to do what we were doing. And so together in consultation with John, we decided to just narrow it down to the US and this one stop in Japan. This, what you're about to see, so I have a variety of presentations that are recorded. This one is totally unauthorized, I apologize, and it's a horrible thing because it's my iPhone, but it's such a moving moment in this excerpt from I Have Nothing to Say and I'm Saying It, that was presented as part of PBS's American Masters series. It's very short, it's only a couple of minutes, so.
Have you learned anything through the great debate over this piece, Silence?
I'm not so interested in learning as in changing my mind. And that has changed. And I think all of us have changed in the time since 433 was first made in the early 50s. We have less confidence now in the time as it goes into the future. We wonder, for instance, how long the future will be. We don't take for granted that it will be forever. We wonder whether you might say we wonder whether we have ruined the silence. Our intention is to affirm this life, not to bring order out of chaos, nor to suggest improvements in creation, but simply to wake up to the very life we're living, which is so excellent once one gets one's mind and one's desires out of its way and lets it act of its own accord.
So I need a moment to just think about what he just said. I was working at MoCA, and one of the very first programs we ever did was a performance piece that was created new. And that happened in 1983. That program was called Available Light, and it was created by choreographer Lucinda Childs, composer John Adams, and architect Frank Gehry. For the 10th year of MoCA's public programming, we were able to release and open this project that was a profound collaboration, but was a composition by John Cage. And I started by writing him a simple inquiry, asking if he would be willing to meet with me to discuss a possible collaboration. And this is his response. It was the first message I got from him on his famous notogram paper, saying that he had just returned and that he could be interrupted. And so the next thing I knew, I was on a plane going to see him, completely intimidated because of his stature and how much respect I had for him, and how much work I knew that I'd have to do to really become a good collaborator. One of the things that happened was Franz von Rossum, a composer, who had at once undertaken to write a biography of John, and later didn't, for reasons that I won't speak about, but he had been given by John about 8 boxes of correspondence and to prepare himself for what he was going to write. And the agreement was that he would have to put it in chronological order. And he offered, Franz did, for me to look at that work once he heard that I was undertaking a project with John Cage. And so I accepted after John Cage gave permission as well. And this is just one of hundreds of letters that are now on file at and in the archives of Northwestern University, where people can go, especially if they're scholars studying Cage. But anyway, it's from 1965, as you can see, and talks about, a cloud chamber of, new techniques in the arts, and that all of this information would collide. And as you can see, you can read for yourself, as our entire environment becomes structured by human artifacts, it would seem that our only way of acquainting ourselves with their new properties and meaning for us is to allow them to encounter one another directly in a kind of dialogue. And that became a kind of theme for what we called Rolywholyover Circus. But it was also a way in which he composed many other pieces. So in one of my early visits to John, he gave me his phone book and told me that I could start visiting some of the artists that were listed in this. And of course, this page doesn't show artists, it shows supplies, but I was surprised. And so one by one, I would go and meet with Dick Higgins or Richard Castellanos or Norman O'Brown. I mean, and they would, I thought, send feedback to Cage about whether or not I was sincere enough, and I was. So he continued to work with me. I'm not sure about that, but I definitely had a feeling that that was part of what was going on. And then he was completely supporting whatever I was doing. So we knew that it could not be and would not be a retrospective. That's not something that would have interested John. What it was took us about a year, maybe more, to figure out. But I began reading not only all of his correspondence, but as many books on him and by him that I could read. And then I started literally noting the artists' names or the people who had been most influential on his thinking, and who he was interested in. And I would bring him these lists. This one is dated 1991, May 23rd. And finally, we decided that the main project in what became a series of a circus that had 4 different aspects to it. Some we would ask for visual art. Some we would ask and request or search out memorabilia, letters or objects or whatever. And that finding those materials was up to my staff and me. Occasionally he would be very specific, as you'll see. So you can tell from this page that where he's taking people off the list for reasons he didn't necessarily explain, or where he was adding people, or where he was being very specific, as in the case of Stephen Addis and Enzo paintings. This is an indication. So I would send John letters with questions, research questions. He had a fax machine, but he didn't like it and didn't trust it, though I believe, and Laura Kuhn, who worked closely with him and me during this time, can confirm that he nevertheless used the fax machine, and he would use and incorporate new technology, but he loved to handwrite. And I'm only showing this not because of the content necessarily, but because he sent me these answers back to my questions, but then he faxed me a whole different set of answers with this letter. Same letter, same questions, mostly the same answers, but then he added that, Jasper Johns wouldn't allow us to borrow some of his work because it was too long be away. So I kind of am skipping ahead, but it will become clearer, I hope, as I proceed, that in one of my last meetings with John Cage, I asked him what this whole thing was, not really understanding yet whether it was a circus or not, and he said it was. And so I had just been reading Norman O. Brown's book, Closing Time, where he puts into dialogue the scientist, philosopher Vico, the Italian one, and James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake. And I was struck by a word in it, even though it had been in many of John's compositions and writings, called Rolywholyover. And John immediately took that book off his shelf, opened it to this page, and read out loud. And he said, yes, it's Rolywholyover. And most of you who are looking probably are familiar with the idea that there are 10 very long, almost 100-letter words in Finnegan's Wake that represent a thunderclap. And this thunderclap represents a significant change in the culture and in technology. And this particular Rolywholyover comes after the 10th one. And as you also may recall, Finnegan's Wake begins with the broken sentence and ends with the first sentence. So the book itself is a circular narrative. And I am in no position to be able to explain the profound levels of cultural implications in this book. But I did feel that we ourselves, with changes in the internet and all of the things that Marshall McLuhan had been indicating, and Buckminster Fuller, that this was a very significant time in our environment, in our history, and our culture, and that this circus was going to be part of that change. And so that's why I'm showing you this page. Now, this is a letter that I also found in the archives. And before I refer to it any further, I want to back up and say that Marshall McLuhan's son had written a book, and it was about the thunderclaps about the thunderclaps in Finnegan's Wake. And he was the one who kind of put forward those theories. And I was able to read that in the archives that I referred to later, in those boxes of information. So what was happening to me is I was learning about all of these people I was meeting, the times when which John would, meet someone through their correspondence or their call or an event, and whether he was interested. I started to know whether or not he was inviting them back to play chess, which was usually an indication that they were going to have a much more deeper relationship. And anyway, this is one of the letters, notograms that I found, where he was indicating to Marjorie Perloff, who has spent a lot of time with Cage, and who I just actually saw an interesting video of her speaking about John's writing through this for the second time through Finnegan's Wake. But anyway, he was giving her a music lesson, helping her to understand that when she reads a new stanza, that she needs to take a breath. And if it's a lot, you can read this yourself, so maybe I'll be quiet for a moment. But what's important about this is that he was doing it in a way, he was trying to help her think a little bit differently about the visual as well as the oral, as well as the literal written work that he was doing. And in Rolywholyover Circus, which is what our project was named, Cage expressly noted that there needed to be 3 spaces between Rolywholyover and a circus, so it seemed relevant to this presentation. And this is an indication of where John is using, he's using a mezostic on James Joyce's name and Rolywholyover. So sorry, I'm going to go back, but I want to say that what you're going to hear when I return back to the other slide, is a tribute that was made by Klaus Schoening, who worked with John Cage and in WDR in Germany, in Cologne. And after John passed, I invited him to make a radio program using source material from their collaboration on Rolywholyover, a very amazing piece, also based on the second writing through Finnegan's Wake. So it's only a couple of minutes. I'm going to return to it now and let it run and hope that it runs.
Subject reality. What would you say? This table's real. Can you tell us what was it? Just to roly over, and yes, in every way. And yesterday when that man spoke, you said what he said was good.
She had told me that
You
her
didn't
teacher
object.
at the top of the oval.
Were you butterfly? Or were you becoming a
And
man?
the bottom is the
In Zen, you said most important thing is life.
the ground,
And just today, when
he
this
said
other
the
man spoke, you
ego
also said what
has
he
the
said was
capacity
good.
of closing itself
Again,
off
you didn't object.
from its experiences.
Nor did he.
God, whether it comes to
Why don't
it
you
from
answer
the
Circus
surface
that all
perception,
that
or
flows?
whether it comes to it
But how
and
can you?
through the dreams.
In Zen, you said
And
most
can rise
important
action
thing is death.
or it can flow.
It is just that in Zen,
It can do
there is not much
so it can
difference
become
between
closed
the two.
or open. But by asking
Sutra,
questions,
the
and if
Sanskrit,
answered by means of chant,
the thread,
it does this by means of its
Then
likes and dislikes. I would have no control, so that if
Dushan
the ego
telephone
develops
from
its
Kansas.
likes, my work rather
It's
would
like
then it
nothing
will close
on earth.
itself off from the
I
dislike.
feel as I did before
Now,
becoming
since
a
this
ghost.
design was
I have no
oval,
regrets.
and therefore
I
life
welcome
was very
whatever
canvas,
happens
then
next.
I thought,
So this page is a set of notes that I took to John, asking him various questions. But also it was the last meeting that I ever had with John face to face. I didn't know that, nor did any of us. And in this is when we picked the Rolywholyover title. And then John asked me a question, and it was, what's the difference between silence in music and silence in the visual art? And off the top of my head, I just said nothing to see. And he said, that's what you have to write about, nothing to see-ness, which was something that stumps me even today, but I did make an effort at it. Nevertheless, he had the patience to answer all of the questions that you see. So I'll carry on, but nothing to see-ness is the essay I ended up writing. And I want to say that this publication, I knew also that John wouldn't want a normal catalog to accompany this composition / exhibition. So we began working on it. I would come with my ideas and he would add his and change and correct. But he also, as many of you may know, studied bookbinding early on in his career, and so in his life. And this, when we got down to deciding that it was going to be a box instead of a book, and that it was going to have pamphlets and artworks and different types indications of his compositions, that he wanted to have this kind of translucent paper, and he told us what binding we used, and there were different sizes, and he was hoping that these pieces that were assembled in this box would be given away or copied or redistributed in any order. It was a composition in and of itself. And one aspect, which you'll see in a moment, wasn't finished because it would have required almost 300 pages of additional material, and we couldn't fit it all in the box. But the one I want to read is the second one. Every generation poised on the edge of massive change seems to later observers to have been oblivious of the issues and the imminent event. All right, so in this this is a page also from that essay where he describes, this comes from a transcription of a tape I made with John when we would discuss things. He wanted this project to make a large room at MoCA, which is not divided into a place like to live creatively. That is to say, enjoy yourself doing nothing, and also to be in a situation where you could make anything. You could make a dance, write music, write poetry, do printing, all the various things we think of that people can do, plus being able to put food together. In other words, to live. Maybe leaving out the bathrooms. I would like, for instance, a jacuzzi, if we could put one in. It's going to have art in a way that one does, and it will have plants, stones, all the things that make life non-oppressive. So of course, we would talk about these things, and we couldn't have hired a cook and traveled that cook, and we couldn't have had the jacuzzi. We basically were able to meet all the other requests that he had. Here's another notogram where he's talking about, the artworks of Jasper Johns, and how he would have to lend. He would call Jap and find out what we could lend. Anyway, what we ended up doing is taking wonderful works out of MoCA's collection by Jasper Johns. And here's where it was very clear, because Marcel Duchamp was such an influence on John Cage, that we needed to have whatever we could have on loan from the Philadelphia Museum of Art. So the museum was collaborating. There were going to be a site for the tour. And so they sent us this list, and the indications are John's little checks of which ones he wanted to have in the circus. Plus he added 3 standard stoppages, which is this piece, which is quite well referenced in his writings about a string being dropped, a meter of string being dropped 3 times, and the beautiful differences that you could get from these droppings, and that there wasn't a human hand involved in making these lines. And this artwork was the only one that had a requirement that if in the composition, the score that John made with Andrew Culver, when it came up, to be moved, it could only move once in each location, so it would have to move out of the circus altogether. And I don't think that ever actually happened. But this is the list of all the people, all of the artists, and some scientists who were included in the circus. And you can't possibly read it, but if anyone's interested in any of these materials, I can forward them on to Cesar. We found John all along the way tested different ideas. So as I said before, there were 4 different galleries that had 4 different compositional ideas, and one of them was called the Museum Circle. And he asked me to write all the museums in Los Angeles or any city where the tour went, to find out any museum that had a public collection, not private collection, that was willing to loan, what 10 objects they would be willing to lend to a project by John Cage. And that was it. Then it was up to the organizations to respond. I wasn't supposed to call and convince them or cajole them. And meanwhile, when he was invited to do visual art installations, he would try out these ideas. So let's see, where am I? This one is from it's a mineral museum in Munich. And what happened is, he would place the various objects that were chosen by chance in a chance-derived way. And he liked that. So he decided we'd go ahead with that at MoCA. And sadly, John passed away prior to the completion of the circus, though that last meeting he and I had, he looked at me and said, "This circus has a life of its own, doesn't it?" Meaning he was convinced that it was done, that it was going to be realized. And I said, "Yes, it does." But once he was no longer there, I ended up making the choices of each institution. actually, I didn't make any choices. I just followed discreetly the numbers in order that were submitted to me. They were chance-derived numbers from 1 to 10. And so this just shows that as we proceeded along the tour, how the various objects were chosen. Now this, I'll stop and let it run. That is the last fax that I got from John. And as I said earlier, he didn't really trust the fax machine. That was a checklist that I got from the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. And he had made the selection, which I'll show you in a picture in a moment. But it turned out to be this very, in my mind, a very beautiful kind of fax drawing. But it also was sent to me 9 days before he passed away. This is the list of art that was coming from our local community. And we ended up choosing where to place the works by straws. You know, we would pull numbers out of the hat, and following a similar pattern that Marcel Duchamp used in a composition, a verbal composition he made with his sisters called a Rata Musicale. And it looked like this. He wanted the chess games and tables and books, and there's plants. You can see, and in the cabinets, we had musical scores by John, and which we donated later to CalArts. And people were very, in the drawers of these cabinets, there were books that were similar to those that were in John's library, and or that related to the various artists and thinkers who were in the circus. So you could see that was right in the foreground is Ingmar Bergman's bustier from the Hollywood Lingerie Museum. Next to, you know, there are sculptures, and there were odd and interesting things that would happen. So to the right, in the rear, that sort of checkerboard piece can be assembled by chance. And next to it, very faintly, you can see is a tie. I think it was a Salvador Dali tie. And then lower to the right is a tieless man, a portrait. And I'm sorry, I don't recall the names of the artists, but I can go look at the checklist. And then there's a sculpture also in front that doesn't have a tie. And I just thought it was such a humorous thing that I could never have thought of as a curator, or John probably couldn't have thought of, but it just happened. And those kinds of things happen throughout. So you can see the plants are not necessarily thriving, and below the plants there were rocks. We had just about everything that he requested. And we found that people would show up and just to play chess. And in fact, somebody sent out postcards to have a chess competition at MoCA on a free night. We had Thursday nights were free, and so we would find these performances taking place in the galleries. This gallery I refer to as the John Cage Gallery, because all of the work are scores or watercolors or prints that John created at Crown Point Press or with Ray Koss. But in the middle, sorry, I know I'm not being very factual here, but I hope you'll excuse me, and those who know the facts could chime in later. But in the middle is an actual journal of Henry David Thoreau's that was borrowed from the Morgan Library, and written in pencil that he had invented, and containing this feather that appeared in some of John Cage's prints, and also in his visual, in performances. He used these, he had the drawings of Thoreau, which he loved, because they didn't have an egoistic kind of artistic style. They were very humble, and he used them in musical compositions as well as texts and performances. And so this is just an example. The blue arrow indicates a Rolywholyover, where R equals Rolywholyover, representing the garden that he visited in Japan and still is there, where there are 15 rocks that you can't see all of them from any particular viewpoint. And he visited there many times. On the lower right hand side are the rocks that he actually used to make the Rolywholyover drawings, and they were the shape of the garden, and he would use chance to select the pencils and the lead of the pencils, and then the placement of the rocks, and then the number of times that the rocks would be drawn around, which was also a kind of egoless composition, a way of composing that he did also for several musical compositions, this one being for flute. But you can just picture the garden influence on this as a parameter for making these pieces. So the musical score was dubbed Rover by John, and it was by Andrew Culver, his assistant, standing for Rolywholyover, a circus. And in his own words later on, if we play it, Andrew describes the problem of artworks crashing into one another. But the idea was that there were going to be, within certain time brackets, movement of objects to different locations on the walls. And we mounted the security of the pieces could not be too high so they'd be harmed, or too low so they'd be kicked. But they would be, in unusual settings. And a certain number of artworks would be moved around each day according to what was humanly possible, considering that all the workers in the gallery would have other things they had to do for their jobs, but they were changing the artworks while the audience was present. And John had done a prior test of this idea at the mattress factory in Philadelphia. And in that case, the workers did it, that was actually the gallery director, I believe, who changed the artworks before the gallery would open. In this case, it was happening while the visitors were in the gallery, so they could see, it wasn't hidden. The work that was taking place in the composition wasn't hidden. So this was, with the one exception of the very first installation, we needed to install so that people could come in and have something to look at, not just seeing 6 works installed while they were there. One of the requirements was that we have natural light, and the only time we didn't have natural light was in the night. And you can see that we're setting up the registrars, looking at the score. I'm standing there, don't know what I'm doing, but we always had a registrar with the gallery handlers, the art handlers in the galleries, installing. So it was done professionally, and then there was a registrar, in this case 2 registrars, who were present watching to make sure that everything was being done properly. Nothing at all got damaged, and I'll tell you, there was only a couple of small things that were missing from the book section where we had books in the drawers. And here is Merce Cunningham with me and the director of MoCA and his wife on opening night in MoCA. It was very important that Merce was supporting this, because I knew that loans that had gone from their home, Merce and John's, had been missed. And then after the loss of John, I didn't want Merce to feel that he didn't have, that there was too much change what happened in his life. But after several weeks, he let us know that he wanted this to happen. And he came to Los Angeles for the opening and said that it really captured John's spirit, and he was quite happy with it. It makes me very sad to just say that, even though I'm couldn't have asked for a better review from anyone. So here we are. The circus is operating, and there's a photographer standing in one corner, the same corner, every week. She came to take one photograph so that we could see how much it changed. And then in the rear, you see some walls. Well, John requested, some of his instructions were that everything would move. So even electronic works had to move. He wanted to have movable walls as well, so that the visual field would change constantly, and it did. So those movable walls back in the rear are still in use at MoCA now, but they were designed specifically for this show as that, well, I'll get to it later, but so you can see that it would look very different. I mean, you could tell that it was Rolywholyover Circus wherever it went. But if you came back in a week or in 2 weeks, the artworks would change. Here is an interactive poetry project called Inagrams by Jim Rosenberg, where you can see how dated this is because we're still using Apple computers. But there's the work up in being moved and changed. In the foreground is an artwork that had sound element, and that piece is by Fanny Schoening. And you can see that if you're familiar with the work of Nam June Paik, there's a television work there. There's, some Franz Kleins, there's Kelly's, there's an extraordinary group of people who were part of John's life, and they're part of theirs. And this translucent file is reminiscent of one of the first artworks that John made, also using translucent plastic. But in this case, this is where the memorabilia was housed. And so the installation of the memorabilia was by chance, and people could open the drawers, but they couldn't touch the materials because we wouldn't have been able to guarantee their safety to the lenders. But the very famous piece Reunion, the electrified piece chess game that John played with Marcel Duchamp, we were able to receive that as a loan. And on top of that chessboard above are pieces that were by Man Ray. And so these, just as a silly little thought, museum people love these translucent files, and so many contacted MoCA and got where they were made, and I don't know if they've gotten them built, but here are some more pieces of one by Mary Jean Kenton on the floor that people could touch, and another by George Brecht, I'm going to say, the flag Yam performance piece that he did. Anyway, you can see that people were very engaged. And one of the early remarks that John had when we were starting to figure out what this would be was, museums are boring because everything is at eye level. So you can see that he changed that. Why, he asked, are people so engaged in the bookstore? Because they can touch things, they can see things, they're at different levels, they're more engaging. And so this was a very engaging project. This is a thing, also an early interactive computer. It had to be designed by a student up at CalArts, a technical wizard, but named Mark Caniglio, and the overall project was done in consultation with John Cage by David just forgotten his name. Hold on, David Rosenboom. And in it, you could hear excerpts from compositions by musicians, by John, but also by musicians and composers that Cage respected and was influenced by. And here's some lists of the composition. The only way they would change, the chance was operating, was the duration and the order. In other words, which one you would hear first, second, third, if you'd hear 5 seconds or the whole thing. but the compositions themselves were not altered. So these are some of the new people, and that object was given to CalArts at the end. So I don't know what they've done with it, but it was a wonderful project. This is the auditorium, the last gallery where there were instructions on what should happen. One of the instructions was that there always be something that would take place in the auditorium, but never announced ahead of time except for that same day. So we opened a telephone line, and so you could call in if you needed to do that. And then there was, well, I'll show you in another slide. Here's where we would put up the photographs from each week. And you can see we thought ahead how long the show was going to happen. So you could come back and see how things developed in retrospect. And then we did have an LED sign to indicate what was happening that day if people needed to have that. But we found that most people would just go in and sit down, and there was always something going on. Like this was a conversation about the circus with a chess expert on the left, Raymond Keene, a Duchamp expert, and her name slips my mind right now, but I have it. Henry Hopkins, who was the director of UCLA's gallery, myself, and Dennis Hopper, who was watching a football game and decided that John Cage would have liked that interruption. This is the CalArts students playing furniture music, and this is a video was running, and that we had a loan of the wonderful piano, this Disclavier piano that a musician had performed Vexations by Eric Satie, which was one of John's favorite pieces, and which he had performed, and had many composers and musicians help him with this. I think at 800 large number of times to have a complete presentation of Vexations. Anyway, we had this recorded, a mechanical kind of composition playing all of the time. Outside in the world, we had started almost simultaneously with conversing with John, knowing that he had had such an impact in Los Angeles and elsewhere in the world, that other organizations would want to participate. And so he did not ask for this. This is a place where I asserted my desires, and they were to see if organizations wanted to mount their own John Cage related exhibition or event or performance, and we called it City Circus. And in this case, we invited hundreds of organizations. I think 26 were involved, and so that just shows you the map. We said that we would promote the shows, and people did travel from Mocha and other places to other locations. People involved indicated that they had seen an increase in their attendance. That wasn't the objective. The objective was the celebration of our interactions with John Cage. I'm going to skip that. So here's how the circus looked. The museum circle aspect looked in Philadelphia. And you'll notice the basket on top, which was a basket John used to collect mushrooms, with you saw in that clip of video. And you can start to see how each location's personality, how Philadelphia, what was important in Philadelphia collections. This is in New York, and many more organizations collaborated in the Museum Circle project. And now we're in the circus, also in the Guggenheim. This famous piece of Nam June Paik's, we tried to borrow it, and the owner wouldn't lend. And so Nam June Paik was still alive at the time, and we conversed about this, and he said, "Julie, I give you permission to remake this piece." So you just need to borrow a Buddha. He did that for all of his pieces in the show. So we borrowed a Buddha, we set up a live camera, he instructed us. And then at the end, we had to give everything back, which we did. And you can see the famous tire print collaboration. I mean, there were some amazing objects in this. Those screens were also John's specific request to have Enzo paintings that also would be revealed by chance. They were also subjected to the score. So when they would appear or when they'd be rolled up would change. And so would the location of the screens. So it's very delicate, but also one of the beautiful things is you could walk in and have such close proximity to these delicate scrolls. And this is Houston, so you can see the boots and I mean, they didn't have enough space the way they did their plants and the rocks. But this is the installation of the circus part of Rolywholyover and the crew at work. So I don't know. You can see to the left with Hidden Noise, which is a very famous Duchamp piece that was quite influential on John Cage as well. And here we are in Japan, in Mito. And in the back, you can see draped over, hanging down there is silken fabric. That was from the Sarabai family, and that was a specific request of John's. And they lent that beautiful piece of fabric, which did move around in the show. Gita Sarabai helped introduce John to Eastern thinking. And anyway, I'm not going to try and tell the story of it. It's a loan from the Sarabai family that was included. And this is a performance that took place in the auditorium. So each location was responsible for organizing their own Cage-related performances, and they all did. And it was incredibly delicious to be able to see the variety of artists who were inspired by Cage or New Cage. All right, this I have to stop because that is a 15-minute piece, and I know we're going to take a break probably in about 1 minute. So I'd like to ask Cesar if we could take the break, and I can start with that 15-minute video if the consensus is to go ahead. So I'm going to come out of this now.
Yes.
And hope. So,
Yes.
so is
Thank
that
you
a
so
good
much.
place to stop?
Yeah, maybe it's a good place to stop. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Julie. In advance, I want to thank you for this amazing presentation so far. And we should come back then in 10 minutes at 10 minutes from now. We're all in different time zones, but I think the safest is to say 10 minutes from now, we come back to watch this video that you just talked about. Is that okay?
Okay.
Great. Thank you. That most people are back. So whenever you're ready, Julie.
All right. So, so what I'd like to say to those of you who are with us about some of the media that I have is that I've set it aside. I have two things, and what I'd like to do is just run through the slides that I have available now, and then open it up for a conversation or questions. And if you would like, I'm happy to play both of them. And what they are is, one is a 15-minute video that after the whole tour of Rolywholyover Circus concluded, I took some source materials, some media materials, audio clips, visual clips. I set them, numbered them, and used rudimentary chance operations and set the parameter of 15 minutes. And then I had a clock ticking down. Interestingly, the sound dropped out of a lot of it. And so I accepted that problem as an interesting new development. that is available, and it's called A Circle of Circuses. And then at the very end, I've also got a recording, which is available online in YouTube, not the one I have, but there is a recording of one of John's last performances of a written text called, a composed text called Overpopulation in Art. And it's 26 minutes. And so I love that text. It's one of my favorite performances of his. And it ends with a beautiful, I mean, this is one of his mesostics, but he didn't use source texts. He wrote the text, and he used the same rule. Down the center is overpopulation in art, not repeating any of the letters in the next line, with wing words on the side, but it's a philosophical, inspirational piece. So I'm happy to play either or both of those, but I'm going to run through this now, and then I'll leave it up to those of you present, whether or not you want to hear or see those recordings. So this was my first attempt to come up with contents for what I called the book, and later was the box. So this is the list. Those of you who know Cage well will recognize almost all the names. I won't go through it, but you can see we're trying to cover the many types of interests he had, including later on health. Well, he put down at the bottom, you can see he added food and health. Andrew Weil, that's how I got to know Andrew Weil from the start. He's quite a renowned figure now, but at the time, I think he had just written 2 books, possibly. Anyway, so we went over all of these things, and then he gave me his own list and said he wanted these artists to have pieces of shown in the box somehow. And you can see how he went from, MC Richards, just calling her MC, to Gorky, using a last name. It's a very touching thing for me. And then Bill and Dove are together. That's Bill Anastasi and Dove Bradshaw, who have worked with Merce and he on different occasions. So, and this is the piece that didn't get made. I had used my Apple computer and typed out all the titles and the chapter titles of his books that existed at that time, and asked him if he would do chance operations to tell me which of these pieces he would want to be included in the box rather. And this is what he delivered. It's multiple pages. It's now in the John Cage Trust care, but it never got realized, because as you can see, that 276, I think that's how many pages it would have been had we printed it, and to get all the other things in, we couldn't have done that. So this was the outcome. It's a silver box, and what happened was the designer I sent to meet with John Cage to collaborate with him. All of the staff and the crew that I had, the key people who were going to be responsible for portions of, met with John Cage and got his ideas firsthand. So referring back to that translucent flat file, that was our designer for the gallery and our head of the whole crew, John Bowser, who is deceased. Anyway, this box, he wanted something to be clear. So the designer took a clear plastic box. He didn't like that. She went on until she found a metal. I told her the story about John looking at a pool of fish, and the fish rising to the surface and breaking the water and making this interesting moment. And so I said, maybe John would like something that looks silvery on top and that could remind him of that. And he loved it. He liked it because thumbprints could go on, scratches could go on, that it was something that was reflecting the person. Anyway, and it was kind of an homage, this box, to Duchamp and his green box, and also to the Fluxus boxes. So there were letters, copies of letters that were included. There were essays by Laura Kuhn, who's here, and Mark Swed, and and Darnencore, and people who really had been advocates and admirers and collaborators with John Cage. We had scores, so this is a page from the second writing through Finnegan's Wake, and this James Pritchett, who wrote a really wonderful book called The Music of John Cage, and has written small articles about silence in John Cage. He was puzzling, I'm told, by Laura Kuhn, and I remember it. He puzzled for quite a while trying to figure out what he thought was a score. And he finally said to John, I can't, what is this? And it turned out to be plant watering instructions for the multiple numbers of plants John had throughout the loft he and Mars shared. And when he was gone or they were gone, they'd have to bring people in to figure out a short watering, long watering. Anyway, it was beautiful. And this is a publication that was made in Japan. They did this on their own initiative, but you could see that they were sort of inspired by the box. And this is a recent, meaning from, 2012, so long after the circus had taken place, by the critic in art critic in Los Angeles, who said, as listening is to music, so seeing is to visual art. Perception is a three-ring circus. Lively, surprising, playful, contradictory, shaped by context, infected by time, contemplative, generous. At MoCA, a visitor saw himself see. And so I thought that was a wonderful retrospective review. And one of the authors, Mark Swed, who I hope one day will complete his biography, which is the only one I know of that was approved by John Cage. He wrote about the number pieces, and this was an attempt for us to finally have a completed listing of John's most recent compositions, where he used time brackets and single notes, and it's a beautiful way that he concluded his compositional life. But for this slideshow, it's, as you can see from my handwritten note, he was working on it the day he ended up having his aneurysm. And so I had gotten a call from Laura. Her memory might be different than mine, but saying that John was very happy with how everything went, and that she had had an opportunity to have quite a personal conversation with him, and she left. And then she got a call. John had been making iced tea or lemonades, one or the other, for MERS, and had collapsed. And so she returned and said that he was hospitalized. But this was the last document that I was aware of that he had been working on that last day. So he had a very quick completion of his life. And it turned out this interest in thunder, it was thundering and raining that day. So I hope that his heartbeat and that thunder.
The title is
merged.
Overpopulation.
So I'm going to escape that. This is the Overpopulation in Art, which was delivered at Stanford University in honor of his 80th birthday, but he was 79 at the time. And it's the piece I suggested that I wanted to share with you, but now there's a version of it that has the actual poem traveling by your eyes while he's reading it, and I recommend that. This is actually taken off of the soundboard from the performance he did at Stanford, and I have it available here without permission. I apologize. So I'm going to stop sharing now so that we can open up the conversation if anyone would like to talk or request one or the other of the recordings I skipped.
Julie, I have a question. I had always associated the Rizzoli box, the design of it, with the metal box that Cage used to keep his Cage cookies in.
No, that was a prototype. So, and I really feel
okay.
that was a prototype box.
Got it.
That he was able to see, and we gave him, I think he saw some prototypes of the, and I'm really having a brain moment where I'm not remembering the name of the designer, and I keep in touch with her. But anyway, so she had that fabricated, and brought it to him, and he approved it.
I see.
So one of the things when he said food, he gave us the recipes, and that's when what the touching moment that we experienced is when I got there after John passed, because you'd called me. I came like the next day.
I remember.
And there was the box, and we opened it, and there were the cookies, that the recipes for which we had. And you and I don't remember if Merce ate them, but we shared those last cookies that John had made.
Yeah.
So it was a prototype. That's what it was.
I see. So there was an association. I had it backwards. I thought his cookie box had inspired the design, but the design ended up with prototypes, which he loved, and he used it as a cookie box.
Yeah.
And it was much higher than the Rolywholyover box.
Yeah, I mean, it was
Like
a prototype.
Yeah.
Yeah, just for him to approve, and he did.
Yeah. No, I get it. I get it. Thank you.
So, anyone?
I have a question. I wondered if you wanted to talk about the shaker cabinets, with the numbered drawers and how they got into the show and what happened to them.
Can you show your face, Ken?
Well,
so yes, all right. Okay,
there.
yes.
Now it works.
So thank you for that question. So one of the things about the furniture that was in the show was that we wanted it to resemble but not mimic exactly what John had in his loft at the time we were working together, because it seemed aesthetically to be cogent. And so those shaker cabinets, they were designed after shaker cabinets and made by an artist in Los Angeles, a painter who loved 50s equipment. And so he handmade all of those. And they were designed to be able to have John's scores and these books. And people, like I said, there were only, I think one chess piece got taken from the circus and one book, and I don't know which one it was. Otherwise, everything was fine. At the end of the circus, we distributed them. So 2 of them, I believe, went to the Cage Trust.
We have one of the, just to clarify, we have one of the cabinets. We have 132, I think, and somebody else has 33 to 64.
Right. Well, there's right.
The work table.
So what we did with all the furniture is we asked the museum, MoCA, if they wanted it. They said no. So we used straws. You got a table, you got a shaker table, and they were designed, that was after an authentic, anyway, we drew straws, and people on the crew who had worked throughout the whole 5 locations had the opportunity to draw a straw, and whoever got the shortest straw, I think, got it. And we kept doing that. So fortunately, I got one, but I wasn't expecting that. One of the exhibition, the lead crew got the other. You got one, and I don't know what happened to the 4th one. I don't recall. But the chairs went that way. Everything, the stools, everything, because John insisted that one of his direct instructions was that people have places to sit and that they could move the things, they could move the chairs. So the chairs were subjected to chance, but not the cabinets. That would have been impossible. But anyway, they moved around, and but they had a set position every day. So all the furniture got distributed to the people who were somehow connected. By chance, though, we constantly did that. So we have, well, maybe we have 2 of them. Do we have 2 of them, Ken?
No, just one, but there's one bottom and one top.
Okay,
Right.
well, that's the way.
Counting that as one, the whole thing.
Yeah, right. All right. Does anybody? My apologies for my memory. Although John used to say, as I recall, I don't cultivate my memory so I can experience everything anew. So that's my excuse. This is a new experience. All right. So anybody want to pipe in or add to this? Jade? Oh, wait, I can't hear you. Laura?
I was just going to chime in with just a little thing. When you showed that piece of paper, Julie, with the names of people he wanted represented.
Right,
And at the bottom, he had written Bill and Dove.
yeah.
Interestingly, that was at a time for Bill and Dove when they were no longer they were still carrying the title of artistic directors
Mhm.
for the Cunningham Company, but Merce was not leaning on them much.
Right,
And so John was like, not making amends, but he was making sure that
Yeah.
Bill and Dove got, represented in this show.
yep, yep. I mean, that was also a time like with overpopulation in art when the poet Joan Ritalik was helping John ungenderize,
His language.
language, and he did. But also he was very aware that he de-emphasized a lot of women in his work over years. And now he wanted to make sure that he included people, whether they were famous or not. So we had Marcia Kinder, Mary Jane Kenton, and Fanny Schoening, and people who he did know and whose work he did admire, including Dove Bradshaw, who later I had a little small show with separately. So anyway, yeah. So yes, that's nice. I think, I was trying to think this morning of how I would feel now in retrospect, what I learned. And I really feel that so much of the idea, he was so sincere about trying to provide opportunities for everyone to have a very present, awake moment. He just over and over. And the silence, I'm convinced, is also the silence of the ego, that he wanted to be able to have a spiritual life and for us to reconnect. That's my thing. I'm saying this is, in retrospect, to have this spiritual connection and to empty our ego enough so that we could have it, so we could really have an awareness. And I know that's not profound necessarily or new, but it's my current takeaway from all of this.
He also, Julie, there was this very funny thing that happened in the last year of his life. So
Oh, you're broken apart.
Laura, you're muted. Laura, you're muted.
You're muted.
there.
Start again.
I was just remembering that when he was on his last tour, which I got to go on, this was the last year of his life. We were away from something like January to May or something like that. And we were traveling a lot. And that trip included a final stop at Tini Duchamp's house in Villiers, where he could play chess for hours. And I got to take a bath in the Niki de Saint-Phal rhinoceros bathtub. They were all horrified. You did? But what I wanted to tell you is that we had initially scheduled a trip to see Fanny Schoening. So it just made me think of this. And it just, time got too crunched and we couldn't do it. And he wrote to Fanny, but he was so certain that she was going to be upset with him that he wasn't coming. And I said something like, this is a stupid ending, but I wanted to share it with you. So I said, she'll understand. You're an artist. You're a busy man. The schedule is killer. And he said, no, Laura, he said, no, artists are like cats. They want what they want when they want it.
Well, well, would anyone like to see that 15-minute, it's not that it's so brilliant, but in it, that 15-minute video, Circle of Circuses, it's got Jackson McLowe, who switched the piece tree to beach. And then, so he made a new piece and he did sit in the auditorium for hours. I think if it wasn't the opening night, he did it while he was present. And then, oh God, what's his name? We had the Freeman Etudes performed by Janos Nyegezi. I mean, we had the most incredible participation. and it happened all along the way. But we did use, like, for example, we could not get the loan of Zen for Film. So Nam June Paik walked my media person through how to do it. So he remade it for video and collected dust along the way. And so this really weird weaving of chance and of course no chance, because I chose all of the materials but I didn't know which order. And in the end, it kind of makes sense. It ends with the beach birds and a little segment of that from Merce and I think beach. So do you want to, should I let it play, Cesar? Okay, so I have to share again.
I think that there is,
do all
yeah,
that.
an agreement.
And then we can, after that, I think, I don't see any students anymore, so they
There
left.
are, yeah, Becky.
Okay,
Here, MA,
all right. All right,
Becky,
so
there's Siming as well,
let's
whose
share.
camera isn't working, but
Okay, and the overpopulation in art, I can't recommend it high enough. So go to YouTube and watch. And this, let's see if I can get this.
The Museum of Contemporary Art presents Rolywholyover, a circus, for Museum by John Cage. Cage said of this project, the basic idea is that the exhibition would change so much that if you came back a second time, you wouldn't recognize it.
Is all subjected to chance?
This is a computer that does the random operations for the daily changes we have in the gallery. It uses a computerized I Ching. So it draws a picture of what operations are going to be done every day, and also tells us where in the gallery they will be placed and in what order. Each beep is drawing a little picture of where the work of art is going to be placed on the wall.
People have always said that what he did was not music, or he changed the definition of music. His idea of music was the act of listening, was the act of serious paying attention and listening with just about every essence of your being.
I couldn't be happier than I am in this apartment with the sounds from 6th Avenue constantly surprising me, never once repeating themselves.
one evening after hours, and unofficially, he brought it to Dave and Barrett, with the admonition to be careful. So throughout his home movies, you will never see barbed wire. You will never see armed guards. You will see life as normal as they could live it.
He always wanted to hear new things, and he always wanted to be awake, alert to everything that was happening. He believed that the artistic experience was an experience of awareness.
John Cage was playing chess on a more or less regular basis with Marcel Duchamp. I had just seen a little booklet which had tracings of the details of the large glass. Each element by itself. And I thought they were very beautiful. And I said to Merce that I thought it would be nice if he did a dance using a set of Marcel's. And Merce said something like that would be nice. Will you ask him? And so I saw Marcel and I said it would be very nice if there could be a set for Merce based on the large glass. And he sort of gaped at me and said, who would do the work? Meaning not he. And I said, I would do it. And he said, oh, fine.
Firefly talking. Send help at once.
Help is on the way.
Carry on, men. Help is on the way. 1 captures E3 check.
Beach. Beach.
What really makes this piece different than the music is that we had to really watch out for the traffic problem. Yeah. That's what made it complicated. The exceptions that had to come about. For example, paintings don't overlap. Right. A sound and another sound overlap, like our voices and all these voices. But if one painting's here and the other one wants to go here, that can't go. So we have to say, well, that won't be allowed. We'll have to try again.
I knew him, but it's really my daughter, Christophe, who knew him best, and who educated me to understand John Cage. At first, for many years, I consider him a little so-so, but she really finally influenced me to understand the seriousness. I finally think this is the best show we've ever had. It's so exciting, and I discover how much affinity I have because I love bric-a-brac objects, and I love to put things together that are not supposed to be together.
Beach.
Okay. So
Wonderful.
I want to say I remembered the designer. Well, actually, I had her right here all along. Catherine Lorenz, the designer of the box. And I just want to thank you for inviting me to inaugurate your new pirate program. I guess I was a little bit of a rebel who's become more conservative with old age. Anyway,
thank you so much.
it
It's
was
been such a privilege. And
Yeah.
I would like to thank for all this unique opportunity has given us to
and
access.
thank you to these colleagues who I know who've done such great work on behalf of Cage and continue their own great work. I'm humbled that you were here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah. Anyone, I don't know if anyone would like to say anything else or ask anything else before we wrap it up. I know that this has probably gone beyond the 90 minutes that we had originally planned, but there was no way, I think, to make it any shorter with all the amount of information that Julie has so generously shared today. If there's any final comments or any final comments or questions, maybe now's the time.
I would just like to say, Julia, you just always inspire me. Every time I hear you speak, I just feel renewed in the things that I love.
Oh, God, I'm so touched. Thank you.
I feel the same way. I can't thank you enough, Julie, for doing this, and Cesar for organizing it. And there's a wonderful conversation for the students to, if you're following up. Laura here has a program called All Things Cage, and Julie has been a guest there. But this was great to see the visuals. Your exhibition set me on my path to become a curator, and seeing it at the Guggenheim Soho was really a profound experience, and revisiting it today was really moving for me too. Thank you.
God, thank you, Jade. Wow. Okay, well, Cesar, we'll be in touch. Keep up your good work. Get some rest. Bye.
Thank you.
Great to see
Thank you so
you.
much, everyone. Thank you so much, everyone. Much appreciated.
Bye, everybody. Ciao.
Bye.